John. So Ida, of course, was born here in Southport, and her parents are right over there. John was from the Outer Banks, but he was in the Coast Guard, got transferred here, and that's how he and Ida met, which is a typical story around these parts with the Coast Guard and the military. So they had 4 children. The youngest, one died when he was 2, but their youngest son was my father, Art Newton. He was born here in 1922. When he was 14 years old, Ida had been in a hospital in Raleigh, in Dix Hill Hospital, a mental hospital, and that's where she died. And they had come home for the funeral, and on the way back to the Outer Banks after the funeral, they were in a car accident that took his father's life. So my dad lost his mom and dad within a week at 14 years old. So he came back to Southport and lived with Ida's sister and her husband, who had a little store in town, and he would deliver groceries on his bicycle or whatever. He was always drawing. His teachers always noted that he would draw on the sides of his pages, and he just was very talented. So he had drawn a picture of a tugboat that was down on the waterfront, put it in the window of the store, and the tugboat captain walked by and saw it and came in and bought it for 50 cents. So that was his first art sale when he was just a young fella. So once he graduated from high school in 1941, he went to Ohio to the Oxford School of Art to start his formal art training. He continued that until World War II, when he joined the Coast Guard like his father before him. They gave him a camera, and that's where he became photographer. So while he was in the Coast Guard, he did that, and he was still just painting, and every time he'd come home, he would do a one-man art show, or he'd sell his art wherever he could. At one of the art shows that they had at the community building, he met a young lady named Valley, took her to lunch, and proposed to her that day, which she thought he was crazy, but he stayed after and wrote her letters and convinced her to marry him. That's my mom. So they got married and got on a train immediately to go back to New York and live in his bachelor pad. And wasn't long before they got pregnant with my brother John, and Dad did not want to raise a family in New York. So he said, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're got to go back to Southport. He wanted to raise his children where he was raised. So they came back to Southport. He did anything he could. He painted billboards. He worked at the newspapers. He worked at the school on the annuals, took sports pictures, taught art classes, anything he could do to make a living. And they built a little house, and he had a studio downtown, and that worked for a while. And then he wanted the oldest house in town, called the Walker Pike House on the waterfront. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It came for rent. And he decided he wanted to live there on the river so that he could have his studio up on the 3rd floor looking over the river. So I'll never forget, Mom always said, I love that house that we built. It was the perfect house, but he wanted to live in that drafty old house with 7 fireplaces. I don't know why, but that's what they did. They moved there, and he wanted to buy it, and the lady would never sell it, so they rented it all those years. Anyway, they had a couple more children. They had another son, and then they had a daughter. They weren't sure what to name the daughter. They were sitting on the porch one day when a ship went by, and the name on the ship was Star. So that's what they named their daughter, Star. Sadly, Star had leukemia and died when she was 4, which was very tragic for the whole family. I don't think Dad ever really recovered from that. A couple of years later, I was born. We were still living in the oldest house there, and the family had gone over to the beach. I was 9 months old. Mom had taken my brothers and I, and we were over at the beach, and Dad went missing. We couldn't find him. They called a search party and found his body had washed up. So he drowned in the river that he loved after being in the Coast Guard. There were no witnesses, no story as to what. There were theories, of course, and even I learned some stuff in the book that Tommy wrote that I didn't know about. But he was very, very talented, ahead of his time, and had the baggage to go along with that, I think. There was a lot of trauma, losing his parents at a young age, losing his daughter. It was sad that he died at 41, but the work he left behind, he left thousands of black and white pictures of Southport when we were just a fishing village. So he documented the history of our town just because he loved it. And then he did all these paintings. So when Tommy decided to do the book, my mom had never remarried. I had inherited all of the box of stuff. So I said, Tommy, I've got all of this stuff of Dad's. So we put it all into a book, and the book is here to capture. I mean, we had paintings coming from Canada that people had bought from him down at the Whittler's bench when he was selling it, and they've just wound up all over the place. And they're still showing up today. We're still getting, people are finding paintings today, and it's like, oh, there's another new one. So we're always very excited when we find a new Art Newton painting. And we have some that are available. We have prints that are available of some of them that you can get, but the book kind of chronicles it all. And that's the story of Southport's first professional artist and photographer. So, if you have any questions?
I have the book. It's terrific.
Oh, wonderful.
History in there.
Yes, it is.
It is a
Yeah. We love our Southport, that's for sure.